If anybody is waiting until they are ready, they will not do much. And if anyone asks me, like, what is the secret sauce to Flower and Water being around for 17 years? It is a constant evolution.
There's an entrepreneurial spirit, which I think is restlessness, sticking with what you have versus a restlessness around pushing for more. And
why grow it? Like, what is the ego piece for you guys to decide, like, hey, I want to go make this into a global brand?
Dude, trust your instincts.
Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence Podcast. This one is going to be a little bit different, but also about something that is so critical, which is what it means to be an entrepreneur in a restaurant and building out a restaurant business, which is very much an entrepreneurial activity. In fact, one that I think so many people individually think about doing, and then they realize just how hard it is and probably get waved off from it, and also how hard it is to make real money doing it too. But everyone's passionate about food. So most restaurant groups don't survive their fifth year. Today's guests are 17 years in running 6 of the most beloved restaurant concepts in San Francisco, feeding tens of thousands of people a year, while doing it, building a frozen pizza brand, a consulting arm, and one of the country's most influential regenerative agriculture platforms in food service. The Flower and Water Hospitality Group is a rare San Francisco business that has not only grown up here, but has really thrived. Since opening the original Flower and Water, which is still going and easily still one of my favorite restaurants, in the mission in May of 2009, the group now operates Flower and Water, Penny Roma, Flower and Water Pasta Shop, Flower and Water Pizzeria, Flower and Water Pizza Shop, Trick Dog, which I didn't even realize, I learned that in my research, an amazing bar with also delicious food, F&W Foods, and FWHG Consulting. At the center of this are two guys who couldn't be more different in some ways. Thomas McNaughton is a Culinary Institute of America graduate who trained at La Folie, Gary Danko and Quince before staging across Europe. He's the co-chef and co-founder and pasta obsessive behind the whole operation. Two-time James Beard Rising Star nominee and author of Flower and Water Pasta Shop, or Flower and Water Pasta, which is one of the best pasta references books you can get out there in print. And David Steele is, I'd say, probably his opposite number. We'll see if you agree, David or Thomas. But a New Jersey native who spent decades in finance before co-founding Flower and Water. And while running the hospitality group, is also the founder and CEO of One Wealth Advisors, a wealth management firm, a managing partner of Noise Pop, and co-owner of Moxie Yoga and Fitness. This is really about a partnership that actually works. What it took to build a group to survive a pandemic and now expand on environment in SF, and really build something that after 2 decades doing it side by side, you can still make this work. Thomas and David, that was a long intro, but thank you so much for joining me at Entrepreneurial Excellence.
Of course. Thanks for all the kind words.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Before I get into the meat of the questions, I have to say something that is probably going to sound like heresy, which is I just got back from 3.5 weeks in Italy. And I actually think the high quality Italian food in San Francisco is better than the high quality Italian food that I got in Italy. Where do you guys agree or disagree with that?
I think that one of the biggest differences in the landscape in Bay Area, American side, is there is consistency that most places are continually pushing for. And I don't think you see that as much in Italy. And so, yeah, I don't think you're too far from the mark there.
The thing that I found interesting and really about entrepreneurial stuff as well is what my wife and I really thought about when we were eating all this pasta and Italian food is much of it was, it felt like it was sort of stuck in a style of doing things that was not willing to change. And maybe it was sort of because of historical reasons, because of culture, you name it. Whereas my impression, at least, is the Italian food in the Bay Area, and maybe in America overall, is much more willing to break with convention, because we don't, you know, as a tourist, you go to Italy and you're like, I want the real Italian pasta and the food. Whereas you do it in the US, it's just a different story. There's some tradition, of course, in what you're doing, but it can also break with convention and lead to, in some ways, for me at least, my palate, a more exciting Italian experience.
It reminds me, I was having a meal in Bologna. It was a big table. There's probably 14 people around it. And they were plating a pasta course. And someone came up with a black truffle and they started shaving it on top of the pasta. And half the table was in a complete uproar because traditionally in Italy, that pasta is not served with black truffle. And the American mindset, I'm like, keep shaving, baby. Keep shaving that truffle. It looks beautiful. So certainly true, and it's something that drew me to Italian food, and I love that they're so passionate about the historical story behind what each dish is created from, but certainly bound by that as well. And so,
So before we dig too much further into kind of why you all wanted to start a whole pasta restaurant group or pasta, restaurant that won a ton of awards to start with here in the Bay Area, I'm going to ask her the question I always like to ask every entrepreneur who comes on the show. How do you define entrepreneurial excellence? Like, what does that really mean to you? And how have you both, in my mind, obviously, even for being here, you exemplify that you are excellent entrepreneurs. You build something that's had long lasting impact and been successful for, frankly, a really long period of time. How do each of you individually define what it means to be an excellent entrepreneur?
I think the first of all, we have to, I mean, are we entrepreneurs now that we've been around for 17 years? Is Microsoft, are they an entrepreneurial endeavor? There's an entrepreneurial spirit, which I think is a restlessness around sticking with what you have versus a restlessness around pushing for more. And I think there's that, and then there's the sort of agency and equity you get where you feel like you are involved in the creation. In other words, it's an extension of who you are, and that's how I think about entrepreneurship. And so I do think we're still entrepreneurial, even though I would contend that 17 years later, we don't necessarily fit the definition of being entrepreneurs.
But you guys have also started a ton of new things. I mean, obviously you still have the core restaurant, but it seems like, I don't know how often you're launching new things, but it seems like every 2 or 3 years, something new comes from the Flower and Water group, which is entrepreneurial.
I think we definitely don't. There's a not a mindset of resting on our laurels, and for me, that spirit is led by curiosity and problem solving. And I think that with a little bit of structure, that goes a very long way. And that same spirit of like really analyzing something, finding the problem to solve, and putting together the team to do all the solving.
So take us back then on that note, right? Take us back to before Flower and Water existed, Tom. Like you were staging in Bologna, which by the way, we went to Bologna on my trip in Modena as well, including Osteria Francescana, which was a 3-star Michelin restaurant in Modena, all that other good stuff. Delicious. I can say this here. I still think Flower and Water is actually better.
I'm going to eat there in August. I will tell Massimo. So
I met him. He was great. You should tell him. The food is delicious. They were perfect in every way. It's a 3 Michelin star restaurant. It should be. The creativity though that you go and get in the U.S. to me is really different. And I love that more.
Yeah.
But anyways, but you're in Bologna, right? How did you and David, you were in finance, I believe. How did you two end up in a room together? And who convinced who that it was like, man, we should start a pasta restaurant in San Francisco in the Mission, which 16 years ago was not the destination for foodies that I think it's become, even especially in the area, by the way, the Mission you're in is very much a sort of food destination area now, but it wasn't 16 years ago.
I wrote the business plan and then met Tom after. And I'll let Tom tell the story about how we met, but I had sketched the business plan kind of on the back of an envelope and finally got the gumption to do something about it. And I started to activate it. And I'll let Tom tell the story about how we met, though.
But before we get to that, Tom, really quick for David, like, why did you write a business plan around it? I mean, like a million people have ideas. Say, I'm going to go start a restaurant for my favorite food, and maybe yours was pasta. And like, I want to go start a good restaurant. And most of those entrepreneurs, and you guys know this stat, I'm sure, way better than I do, but most restaurants fail. So why did you think, as an investor, like, I'm going to go start a pasta restaurant and go find someone who's great there? Like, what was your thinking around it?
Well, let's be clear. I'm not an investor. We get investors. We got investors and still get investors to invest in our projects. The best way to think about what I do is I'm more like a producer of a movie where I'm not the director and I'm not the actors. So that's, I guess, the best way to define what my role is. But I'd worked in restaurants from 16 to 24, and I worked with a bunch of talented chefs who I perceive to not have the greatest business sensibility and pragmatism. And so the patterning that I was observing when I worked in restaurants was these are creative projects that are not adhering to traditional business principles. So I went and finished my degree in business and started working on Wall Street and started a financial planning practice in 1991. But I really was passionate about eventually coming back to the restaurant industry. And I had a hypothesis that you could have a healthy tension between business principles and creativity. That is to say, business partnership with chef. That would be oversimplifying what we become, but maybe that's a good way to understand how I had gotten to the idea. And I had a hypothesis that you could have that healthy tension between these pragmatic traditional business principles and creativity, and find an intersection where you could have a profitable and sustainable business that was still involved in the conversation of culture and creativity, as I like to say.
Yeah, that's great. And then Tom, how did you two come together to decide and realize like one, this would be a project you wanted to put your name behind, and then and David, and the question back to you when we hear Tom's side of it is how did you decide like Tom's the right chef for this? Because I'm sure just like with any situation, the co-founder you choose has a huge impact on the success of a business. So obviously you guys made the right choice, but how did that come about to say like this is the right person who can be that creative spirit, but also understand the business side? Because I'm sure there's a healthy tension there. But yeah, but Tom, how did that all come together?
I was working in Bologna at a pasta laboratorio called Bruno e Franco, and I was rolling out pasta for months with a bunch of old nonas. And I decided I was based in the Bay Area, but had been traveling for quite some time, and I decided it was time to go back to the Bay. I checked in on Craigslist and saw an ad. They were looking for a chef. And I just responded back to the ad and I said, I don't have a resume. In San Francisco, I've worked at La Folie, Gary Danko's, Quince. I'm coming back to start a goat farm. It was literally like 2 sentences. And that's where me and David first fell in love. We had a series of phone calls. He sent me the business plan, and I was literally putting coins into a telephone booth, and we talked for a couple hours. The business plan, I mean, in hindsight, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit later. Flour and Water, the business plan was so different. There was a retail wine shop in the front of the space. We were going to deliver food on a bicycle for a 10-block radius. And we just kept talking and talking through. And I hung up the phone and I said, yeah, what amazing conversation. What an interesting person. But that name, what a terrible name, Flour and Water. And I think the second time that we had a phone conversation, I said, Dave, are you sure about that name? And he said, believe me, it's unforgettable. And 17 years later, it's its own child that's starting to grow up.
And David, did you feel the same way? You're like, this is my chef. Had you interviewed a lot of other chefs before that? And what made Tom different?
We'd talked to other people, but we had another business partner at the time who had worked with Tom, and that partner said, "If we can get this guy, trust me, please trust me." I worked with him at Quince, and he's a superstar. It should be known, Tom was 24 at the time, and I was 42. So I was I guess, somewhat seasoned business person. Tom,
But you still look the same. You still look the same. Still 42 and still 24. You both look great. So you've done well.
Tom at that time presented like he was a very confident older man. He really carried himself well. We learned over the years that there were some aspects of him that was 24 years old, but he didn't present that way. But his background was extraordinary. He was young and energetic, which I was very excited about. He, of course, was signed off by people who I trusted their opinion, and we just really hit it off. We're both from South Jersey, uh, right outside of the Philadelphia area. We're both, I would say, we're not right side of the tracks. If we're not wrong side of the tracks, we may be. So we actually have a lot of similarities, I think, in terms of our background and culture, and we just really hit it off. And Tom, I guess it should be known that I hired Tom out of the gate. Tom wasn't a partner of the company, and I don't know, Tom, it was pretty quickly after I said, "Hey, Tom, we're gonna be partners for life." And, I just and Tom resisted taking equity because he, I think, knew the commitment he was about to make, which was in binary opposition to having that goat farm and other stuff he might have thought he wanted to do. But it wasn't long thereafter that he accepted becoming my partner, and I kinda knew I didn't I mean, I did think we were gonna be together for the rest of our careers in restaurants. I believed that at the time. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say about it.
No, it's I want to ask more questions about the founding, but really quickly, Tom, like, did you ever do the goat farm? Is there a goat farm producing delicious milk?
One day, we're slowly creeping there.
All right, good. And so David, going back to like the idea, right, the business plan. What about it said to you there needs to be a new type of pasta restaurant in San Francisco? Like, why the location that you chose? Which once again, like the mission was not the hotbed quite the same way it is today. What about it to help you say, I want to go start this and take that risk?
First of all, I wanna go back to your comment about Italy and America and Italian food. A lot of people don't understand that Italian American food is different than food from Italy. Food from Italy, the big difference is, and by the way, I didn't know this before I met Tom. I actually never reconciled this disparity in my mind. Tom taught me about Italian food. I had been there, I'd eaten a lot of it, but what I learned later is that the Italians that came over from Italy, most, and of course, in the New York area, had crappy ingredients, and so they had to make do with it. And so if you think about stewed tomato sauce, they call it gravy now, that multi-generations later. It's sugar added, heavily evaporated stewed tomato sauce that's very thick, and it's delicious. I love it, but they don't even know what that is in Italy. And then, California, we have incredible seasonality. If you look at the original business plan for Flour and Water, if you really look closely, you'll see a person who didn't really totally understand real Italian food versus Italian American food. That is to say, me. I learned it later. And importantly, we didn't, I don't even think Tom knew how good Tom was. And so the restaurant we thought we were opening, which was going to be a neighborhood Italian restaurant, not pasta focused, it was going to be a neighborhood Italian restaurant that had pizza and pasta and was just really great, but not important. The problem is we hired a very person who turned out to be an important chef in Tom. And if you look at the first menu of that restaurant, it looks nothing like the menu looks now. It looks like a completely different restaurant, and that really is because Tom started to spread his wings, and I just got out of his way because the restaurant was doing well financially. I couldn't even get a seat at my own restaurant to eat there. So and so I learned along the way about the difference. So you call it a pasta restaurant now, but if you look at that original menu, it's not obvious it was going to be a pasta restaurant.
Well, and actually add for the listeners, right? I mean, Flour and Water very quickly, I think within like 18 months, started winning a ton of awards around kind of the restaurant you were building. And that was, I guess, I assume unexpected, or is it just sort of once again obvious once time got started, you're like, okay, this is just happening?
Well, even before that, I mean, the momentum, I think that there's a lot of different things that come together to make an exceptional restaurant. The lightning in a bottle that was Flour and Water, a good chunk of that is difficult to put our thumb on. But part of it, I think, was that in 2009, there wasn't a lot of restaurants opening up. It allowed us to have a bigger magnifying glass on us. It was an interesting time financially. I think that that's really is the poor, but it was just a roller coaster from the very beginning. This 3 months in, a 3-star review from the Chronicle, and we were we didn't really have a huge name for ourselves to begin. The night that we opened, at 4 o'clock, a line started to form down the block, and that line did not let up. And so it was just this roller coaster of a ride.
What do you think made that happen? Right. Once again, like there's so many chefs or aspiring restaurateurs listening to this, or who will listen to this, who might say, like, man, like what did you guys do where you have this, you're not super well known, and yet you have a line down the block on your first day and start winning these awards? Obviously, it was great food, but every chef I assume most chefs think they can make great food. What was differentiating about the concept or both of you?
I think quickly, weeks in, how it evolved was this juxtaposition of we wanted to, and Dave was very adamant about this, of this rock and roll atmosphere. We play whole albums. We play them a little too loud. The lights are a little too low. A ton of candles out. Had this like very high energy space with slightly elevated food in it, and I think that evolved over 17 years. And I'm not saying that we were the first, but it was less common then to have elevated food in a more casual atmosphere. And I think that really kind of speaks to the Bay Area and what the guests there want. And I think that most successful restaurants have a point of view, and that there's an authenticity that comes through that. And I think we had a point of view within that atmosphere and where the food meets. And like, it was only for the first couple of weeks where we realized really the heart of our menu is going to be the pasta program and our fresh pasta program. Just a couple of months in, we built a dough room behind the restaurant, that we could actually be able to produce and have a tasting menu. And so much of it was the drive, the grit, and pushing through a crazy opening, but also evolving. And if anyone asks me, like, what is the secret sauce to Flour and Water being around for 17 years, there's a constant evolution. If you look at the business plan, if you look at the menu, if you look at the pictures from day one to where we are now, 17 years later, we're constantly evolving. And I think that is one of the keys.
Let me chime in about this is a podcast on entrepreneurship. It should be known in 2008, I was out pitching investors trying to raise money. Tom knows it's a thorn in my side whenever I hear people think the investor in Flour and Water. It's, I get people to write checks, but I don't write the checks myself. But I couldn't raise any money in 2008. I had 10 friends that said yes, and that was half the money we needed. We had a $750,000 budget, and we had $300,000 of commitments. I sold my condominium and rented to put the other 300,000 in. For the 600,000, we value engineered the project down to 600,000 from 750. Somehow got the doors open. Tom with his team was doing all the prep work in the dining room. It was unbelievable, the little kitchen they were working in where they're doing prep work. And again, this is about entrepreneurship. Tom said, "Man, we need a prep area, and there's that thing above the garage, that little room. Maybe we can build something there." And of course, me, I guess, being the business guy, I'm like, "Okay, how are we going to figure out a way to pay for it and make money?" We were profitable, but we came up with the idea of calling it a dough room, and we did private events. So it was a pasta making, pizza dough making room that had a table that we were able to put chairs around, and we could do private parties around there. That's been a very, in retrospect, lucrative decision, but at the time it was not obvious. So I think that there's some entrepreneurship in those stories.
I've eaten there, by the way, in that room, so it's wonderful. So sorry, Tom, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just going to say, in layman's term, I said, we need a fancy dough room. Dave said, make it a little fancier so we can sit people around it. And the heart of that is a butcher block, just like Nona's in Italy, and rolling out pasta. And so we're allowed to elevate our production, but also have a source of revenue that came through.
So sort of always having this revenue focused mindset to some extent, like, hey, how do we do this in a way that's high quality, but also makes money? And on that note, two things. One, for the listeners who might not remember, 2008 was a really tough time to start a business in general in the US, even more so in San Francisco, where you have this sort of major downturn. Tech is not the juggernaut it was even a few years later, let alone today. And so, like, it was seemingly not a great time to start.
Something that we would absolutely never do today. And we weren't even fully raised, and we started construction, and the exposure that came from that. We are mid deep in construction. We have to continue to raise. I went boar hunting, brought back a whole boar, and in the construction site we held a dinner for possible investors, and the whole dinner was essentially a tasting menu that came from the wild boar hunt.
That's awesome.
And again, that has such a perspective, a point of view, and there's a connection with investments and restaurants, the relationship and the romanticism of that. And it was a huge turning point for us.
In what do you I mean? One thing I've read at least about restaurants starting is that there's a lot of times where you raise money, and a lot of the founders of the restaurants don't raise enough to really get it off the ground. They get it raise enough to sort of open the restaurant, get it started, and then they don't really have enough to really keep it going long enough to really hit its stride. And sort of they spend all the money up front and don't get it for the longer time period. What made it different? Or was it just like you guys were focused early on and saying, hey, how do we do this profitably from day one? We have to charge enough to make it work. What differentiated the restaurant?
Even before that, that grit and the nature of that grit coming through where, we were buying used equipment, stoves, tabletops. I can't imagine opening a restaurant for $600,000 does not exist within our kitchens cost more than $600 at this point. And that the grit to push through that and understand and continue to over even the first couple of years to polish that stone. And we were very lucky that there was revenue day one, which a lot of people experience a different story. And so yeah, we were it was interesting times.
And how did you end up choosing what's in like the location just briefly, or like why the Mission? For those who don't know San Francisco, the Mission's a little bit of a grittier, I think more hip neighborhood. But why the Mission in the first place? Like why that location? Was it just because like you got a good deal on the rent and like people can get there? Like why did you choose it?
I think it was the contrast. It was the contrast. I knew the Mission. My brother lived a block away or block and a half away from the location of the restaurant, so I knew that specific area. There were some restaurants that had trailblazed that area, specifically Universal Cafe and Slow Club had really trailblazed the area. So we get credit for being the first or trailblazing. We weren't really the first, although neither of those restaurants are around anymore, and we are. So I think maybe we deserve a little credit for putting that neighborhood on the map. But I was more involved, I think, in the choosing the location than Tom was, because we hadn't met yet. And I had this vision for this juxtaposition. Even though I had imagined a little bit more of a humble Italian restaurant, I did know it was going to be excellent. And I thought the contrast of that excellence with the grittier part of San Francisco would be an interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, and it clearly worked. I want to talk about you guys together a bunch, but before I get there, really quickly, Tom, walk me through. Just go back a little bit in the history again for a second. Why did you choose? Hey, you want to come start a goat farm? You obviously have this great resume with all these other restaurants in San Francisco. You probably could have gone back to work at almost any of them. Why say I'm going to go off on a limb and start a new restaurant, even with a guy like David, who you obviously got along with well, you liked, but it's still a big risk. What made you say like this is something I want to go do, or is that something that every aspiring chef says I want to go build my own thing?
For me at that point, I was working in restaurants for 10 years. I started at 14 washing dishes in Tabernacle, New Jersey. And I was enthralled by the atmosphere before I was enthralled with the food in the kitchen. And I felt like I was joining a pirate ship and a baseball team all at the same time. Looking back, not realizing at the time, raging ADHD. And one of the beautiful, beautiful benefits of a neurodivergent brain is hyperfocus. One of the hard things is you don't always get to choose on what you're hyper-focusing on. And I was just enthralled day one. The craftsmanship, utilizing like my hands and the creative aspect, it ticked all these boxes for me. And I just simply put my head down and did not pick it up. And I wanted to be trained by what I deemed was the best restaurant or the best chef. And I just hyper focused for years and years. And, by the time I'm working in Italy and had a handful of years of running kitchens, being a sous chef, orchestrating, and I realized, I think I saw older managers, cooks, and thinking there's two paths. I will forever be a student, and that is what continues to have me fixated on restaurants as a whole and our organization as a whole and the growth and creativity that still exists in my job. Forever a student, but I realize that at that point, I can, it was my growth. It felt like I was becoming stagnant and I wanted something to test my skills and to go in, not with having all of the answers. And that started to craft my management style in being okay with not having all the answers, but we will work very, very hard to figure them out. Um, and I always say now too, it's like anybody that's a parent, and certainly for your first child, and you're in the hospital and they give you that child. I don't know a single parent that's like, I'm ready. Here we are. Let's go. Let's take it home. It's like, holy shit, who's coming with me? Like what nurse is coming home with me? And it was the same thing. I think if anybody is waiting until they are ready, they will not do much.
Yeah, they'll never create that baby in a sense. What is, so talking about both of you guys, right? Maybe in a sentence, how would you describe the other person's superpower? And then also what's the thing that drives you crazy about them?
David Steele has a giant bowl of spaghetti, Italian American. Has a giant bowl of Italian American spaghetti in front of him and a massive, massive wall. And so many beautiful things come from seeing what sticks on that wall. And talk about the inquisitive nature and but it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes I'm like, stop throwing spaghetti at the wall, man. We got to focus on this.
Yeah, I do like to throw everything on the wall, and unfortunately, some of it sticks that shouldn't, but some sticks that maybe should. I think what I'll say about Tom is he's a culinary genius that has been willing from a pretty early stage to never rest on his laurels talking about entrepreneurship, and he's relentlessly trying to evolve as a person and as a professional. And critically, the company we are on the path to becoming would absolutely not be possible if not for his innate desire to evolve. And he has now evolved into no longer really being a chef, and he's a business person. He's the CEO of the company. And I think a lot of restaurant groups say they put the founder, chef founder, and maybe they'll give him or her the CEO title, but the reality is they can't stop being in the kitchen and can't become business people. And Tom has become a great business person, and he has a chance of being a very important business person if he continues to evolve, which I'm really confident he will because of that's being his nature.
Yeah, so I want to talk a ton about building a team and actually evolving into that and those pieces too. Before we get there really quickly, what are the key things? One of the things that I talk about with a lot of founders and entrepreneurs is they might have a co-founder, maybe a little bit like you, David, who throws things at the wall and has lots of ideas. Sometimes that can be really dangerous, right? I kind of call that SOS or shiny object syndrome. And the danger is you can go off in a lot of different directions. But that can make a co-founder crazy, or can lead you in the wrong places because you only have so many swings before the ideas kill the company. How do you guys deal with the interplay between this is a good idea, this one's maybe not, or when do we shut off an idea when it's not working? Because everyone has those. And obviously you guys have navigated that really successfully, but how do you navigate that?
Myself and David are not great partners because of our similarities. We're great partners because of our differences. And the dialogue and transparency that exists between us is in essence our superpower together.
So it's really about kind of that just ability to have that communication, be honest, be transparent. Are those some of the key elements?
Well, I think it's really important to know that, and it hasn't always been this way. Part of that may be ego, part of that may have been our age, maturity, etc. But it is most certainly now where Tom does have the final decision on literally everything. And I'm not saying that to, I'm just, that's just the reality of how our company is organized. It's a good thing. I'm executive chairman and co-founder with Tom, but Tom is the chief executive officer of this company. And I think he has earned what is now a confident position to, and I tell him all the time, dude, trust your instincts. Trust your instincts. When he's uncertain about its decision, trust your instincts. When I throw something out there, I know it used to be that frankly, I probably had maybe a louder voice. And if I really wanted to get it done, maybe I could bull my way through getting it done. I don't do that anymore, or at least not as much. And I certainly back down now the minute Tom says no. I don't keep pushing. And I think that's important because I think it could be really confusing for a leadership team to sense frustration from maybe the two most empowered people in the company where they're bickering. Right? They can't arrive at decisions because they don't agree. If we don't agree, Tom gets the final vote. And we've gotten to the point, and as we grow, it has to continue to be that way because we've become a big company now.
I was gonna say, like, how did you both figure out? I mean, it sounds like in some ways you've been able and willing to sort of subsume your egos in different ways, because being in the positions you're in as CEO, executive chairman, but different roles over time, those are roles that people get a lot of egos in some cases. And I think there's a lot of situations of chefs I've heard about, certainly, but CEOs of every company who think because I'm CEO, I'm always right, or I always get my own way. And that ego takes over and ends up destroying businesses. Do you think you had just lower egos than others, or you were able to sort of say like, hey, like my ego doesn't mean I'm always right?
Well, I think a couple of things, and I love how David describes himself as the producer because so much of what David has implemented, I mean, it's the same reason why we're still partners, is he sees and values the true talent in people. He champions them for that talent. And that has now evolved to we have 6 other partners, and like that is the secret sauce to our organization and grows from a tiny little restaurant to 30 million in revenue is that our partnership that exists is our biggest strength. And that takes balance and collaboration, which is so, so important to us. And we want to hear the different views and the different expertise that those individuals bring to the table. But then true leadership is really like deciphering with all this information, what's the next step forward and the next step forward. And I think that also myself and David have a great repertoire with each other. And if, there's not a lot of, if there's something that we ever disagree, normally there's a side conversation about it. And so we can have a somewhat united front with the rest of the team, which I deeply, deeply believe in.
Yeah, having those disagreements in public is very confusing for a team and challenging.
Let me also say that there's a big difference in equity and equity. And you can throw around equity all you want. And by the way, I mean, Tom and I, if anybody found out how much of the company he and I own as co-founders, they'd be surprised at the lower number. The other side of that coin is the amount of equity, literal equity in our company that the rest of the team owns, and we're very proud of that. And our team has stayed together for a very, very long time. The majority of our leadership team has been with us north of 14 years. And these are people that have been promoted from within and evolved their careers. But the critical part of what I said earlier, I think from an entrepreneur perspective is not, don't just grant somebody equity. You can give them ownership, literal legal ownership in the company and treat them like crap. Don't actually value what they bring to the table and celebrate that. And that's the equity in quotes, I would say, is I do believe that everybody in our company in a leadership position, and I hope one level even below that, and maybe even 2 levels below that, feel like this is not me and Tom's company. This is our company.
How did you guys, and it's a perfect sort of segue into talking about like leadership and company building and team building. How did you come up with that sort of equity principle that you just described, David? Where did that come from? How did you agree to that? How was that a thing that you, David, recognized at the time, and Thomas, you got into? Was it something that Tom, like you had learned at previous organizations? And certainly everyone sees all these shows about restaurants where it's this sort of a-hole chef who's being terrible to everyone on the team and pushing them in different ways. And it sounds like what you guys built was really different, but like why?
It's always humans. It's always people. At the end of the day, I deeply believe that the path to happiness for all human beings is to be in the service of human beings. We just, at the end of the day, if we're warm and dry and fed, the only other thing we care about is being loved and valued. And the way to feel that is to make others feel loved and valued. And I'm sorry to get hippy dippy, but I really believe that. And so our number one concern, I just think Tom and I probably want to make sure that he and I know we're going to be warm, dry, and fed. Our next consideration is to make sure our team feels that they're going to be warm, dry, and fed. And pretty quickly thereafter, we want to make them feel valued. And it's why I think very few people have left our company that is in a leadership position, and we aspire to keep everybody there. Turnover is really expensive. I mean, you can look
Really
at it
tough.
a little bit more, nuts and bolts. It's like, I'd much rather keep somebody where I know their positives and negatives, and we can work with their positives and negatives versus the devil we don't know, where we're having to rehire, retrain, learn about their negatives, which most assuredly their resume absolutely does not say, and their references probably don't even share, right? So, yeah.
How do you guys then make sure to hire the right people up front? Like, are there tips and tricks you've done to, because as you mentioned, like turnover is really painful, but that starts by making sure you hire the right person up front. If you get someone who's wrong and not a fit, they still have to leave. So how do you make sure you get it right?
One of the most interesting stories when we first opened, again, 2009, not a lot going on. We placed an ad for Craigslist for servers, and we did an open call. I think there was 2 tranches of a window, it was a couple hours and a couple hours. The first tranche, line down the block. There's literally hundreds of people outside because there wasn't a lot of jobs at the time. And we decided to do interviews. The first interview was 5 people at the same time. And anybody that was an a-hole, we just didn't hire. And so someone coming in as 5 servers, and the guy that's like pouting his chest, and someone answers something about wine, they're like, that's not that varietal, Zinfandel. What are you talking about? You're out.
Yeah.
And so we really truly hired on personality. That has continued, and it's around a farm system, and a farm system that we can take somebody with that great attitude and teach them the skills to evolve. And I think, again, like David said, it's such a migratory landscape when it comes to employment in restaurants. People go here for a year, they go here for 2 years, and the collection of individuals that has stayed with us for 10 plus years, 15 plus years, is exceptional. And so much of that is implemented in the individual with the right attitude, and demeanor. How can we teach them the skill sets to evolve? Our CFO was hired as a receptionist 14 years ago.
Wow.
Our chief people officer, who had a massive amount of experience in restaurant management, but wanted to take a break as a private dining room server for us, and now she's our chief partner and chief people officer. This collection of, as we go down the line, it's like seeing the talent in people and making sure that we can lay a path of opportunity in front of them. And that is never shiny things. That is always based and rooted in the reality, and how they want to evolve, you know?
How do you manage to make that work though, when there might be a lot of people shooting for that next position or next job or that promotion, or they just want more compensation? And
100% transparency. And when somebody, and this is something that David, certainly instilled in me. Like, if somebody has a great opportunity to evolve themselves as a human being, whether that's a different job, a different location, if they have that opportunity, we should support them in taking that. And that is a full circle. The amount of people that have left our organization and then within the next year have come back is insane. And if somebody has an amazing opportunity, we should be able to support them. And that, not for me to go too hippy dippy here, but it always pays off, in the long run.
Do you think they come back because they get out there, get a taste of what other restaurant groups are like, and like, wait a second, I loved what I had at Flower and Water, and I want to go back to that sort of welcoming, transparent environment? Or like, what brings them back?
We had a consultant come in. This is 8 or 9 years ago. And we wanted to kind of do a 360 interviews throughout the company. We were kind of growing at that time. And she hosted a fair amount of interviews and came back and said, everyone talks about the culture here. Everyone talks about the culture here. And when I ask people what the culture is, everyone has a different answer. And we're like, oh my, what an amazing data point. And we started to write down our cultural values. And we just published our 4th edition of it because, again, it has to evolve. And 2026 is different than 2015. That was so important to us to have. I feel like people, in having a sense of purpose, or truly want leadership and guidance. And if they're not all swimming the same way, that's where chaos exists. And so, I think part of it is educational based. Like, we are here to teach and to show people how they can evolve within and take on more responsibility, with equity grants for managers within the company. And we're constantly looking outside of our industry to see how we can evolve from within our organization.
Unfortunately, our attitude is, a lot of our industry is like, oh, don't poach people from other places, or oh, we're pissed off because we got poached. And I think maybe me more than anybody, but I think generally our attitude is, if somebody leaves our organization, we failed to keep them. We didn't create a environment to keep them. We didn't create a path for their career. That was our failure, and we want to learn from that. Our goal is to retain 100% of our team forever. And of course, it's an unachievable goal, but if that's our attitude, maybe we're going to get a little bit closer towards that than our competition.
In order to do that, it takes understanding the individual. And we won't waver from whether it's our ethos or values or structure necessarily, but understanding that individual needs, and being able to craft the next year in front of them, the next 2 years, I think is a really important part of it.
It's and even ethos as well. I mean, treating your team well and building a team that has that culture and feels that, I'm sure translates to the product as well, right? Because I'm sure I would assume you feel the same way about your customers who come in, right? If they aren't having a great experience or not enjoying it, or probably that every negative review you might get on Yelp or something probably pains you and say, hey, how do we do better next time? So that every single person can leave feeling like they got what you guys described as sort of taken care of, right? That's the sort of the good happiness, health, all those other things, and probably leads through a good bowl of pasta and some good wine. But not everyone feels that way, right? So how do you, I'm sure the whole culture plays into the food and restaurant experience being great as well.
Every well-oiled, every company that seems like a well-oiled machine struggles with communication. Everyone does. At the heart, that's what we do. I've been out of the kitchens for some year. My role is quite different now than a chef. But even when I had whites on every single day, the amount that I talked about food versus people is shocking to most individuals. And really, it's about orchestrating and managing people to then create the best possible product that you can. And so, product's also having a movement right now in the food industry.
In what way? What do you mean?
a disconnect of actually the food. And I think that there's a couple of CEOs on camera saying this is the best product, and then like a little nibble from
Yes.
not calling out any companies.
I know which one you're talking about. The chain potentially. No, no. I mean, in that sense, I agree. And like, how did you lead to like make sure like how do you do this communication? Like being really nitty gritty about it. Like, how do you guys do weekly all hands with the team, or is it with each restaurant? And we want to talk about each of your businesses as well. But like, you have many different businesses now. Are you, Tom, like sitting down with each one of them on a regular basis, or do you split that with David? Like, how do you have this communication on a regular basis to give people an idea what's happening and changing and why?
Yeah, I'd say the whole system. So we have a fair amount of expansion in front of us. We have our pizzeria is a hub and spoke model where it's centralized production. That dough room exists within our North Beach location. That's moving to an 11,000 square foot facility in the East Bay. And that is to expand the pizzeria. So we have centralized dough production, commissary. We're also self-producing our own frozen pizza that'll come from the new facility that we can kind of innovate on it a little bit. And we have a construction site in Palo Alto right now. We're just finishing our second cookbook. There's a lot of growth in front of us. It's very different being the captain of the ship versus the captain of the fleet. And it's a radically different communication style. And so there's really a tier system. I mean, we have an executive team. Underneath them, we have a leadership team of directors. And then each restaurant has its own management team, general managers, assistant managers, chef de cuisine, sous chefs. And so bi-weekly, we have our leadership team meetings, which is the executive and directors. We use an OKR system to structure all of the goals for the next year. That OKR system trickles down into the individual restaurants. And we have a weekly manager meetings within each restaurant. We have a series of one-on-ones with each one of those managers and their direct reports. And so it's kind of evolved into a complex system. We have an in-house communications director, which handles both in-house and out-of-house, kind of born and bred in the PR world. But she's centered around all communication.
Does each one of those individuals sort of report, the leaders of each one of the individual businesses report to you, Tom? And then do you report to like David and the board or something? Or how does that work?
Yeah, so we have a board of directors. At this point, they're the only people that can fire me. Cross my fingers here. It's interesting, and in the evolution, job descriptions is in your typical restaurant, job descriptions are not actually utilized on a day-to-day basis, right? Especially the higher up you go. You're the chef, the general manager. You are the plumber, the electrician, the janitor, and so that was an evolution for us of like setting up a system. Again, our chief people officer and setting up a system of direct reports and who reports to who. And we have 90-day as well as biannual reviews that are deeply important to us, that 100% of all employees go through. Those are really checked with our cultural values. And so our cultural values are integrated into our interview system, into our review system. This is everything I just said, I fought. That notion of the company culture up until about 5 years ago.
Why did you fight it? Was it like because you felt this was like it's building all this process that feels maybe very corporate, or like why did you fight it? And then how did you push? Was it David pushing it? Was it how did it get pushed into the organization? And now it sounds like you've really embraced it as well.
Yeah, I don't know if David pushed it. I think he guided it, right? It's an evolution of a tortured artist, which started where, wanting each restaurant to have that mom and pop feel to it. talk about maturity or lack thereof, and understanding how, I think one of my superpowers is beginner's mind within that world.
You mean starting by that you mean like starting with a full blank slate? I don't know, so therefore you're open to learning. Is that what you mean?
I want to just say there's a humility in that. So I want to make sure that when Tom, go ahead and answer, but I just want Tom brings confidence and humility in a really well balanced way.
But I didn't. The great big businesses and their structures. I wasn't studying in school. Was the first person to say OKR. The amount of things that I Google throughout the day to understand. But OKR, what the hell's an OKR? I think regionally it has something to do with it. Kind of the Bay Area. Uh, Against the big organizations. And I just have a completely different mindset around it. And again, I realized that fighting that evolution and that side of the company, I was getting in the way of great communication.
Obviously, you made all these big changes. And it sounds like you were not even really ready to embrace some of those changes yourself, Tom, even though I know you said you also really like to learn and evolve and everything else. How do you create a culture that in some ways obviously embodies both of you guys, right? Where it's like, hey, you don't want to change. You want to keep this mom and pop feel, but then also be willing to embrace change, not just in the processes that you're building, but also from all the new ideas that David's coming up with or you're coming up with, and evolving with the times. Because I found at least people have real challenge with change, right? Even if it's the right decision, they might not see it. And so how did you shift your mind? How did you both shift your minds to embrace these changes and keep embracing them?
I might get this wrong, this quote, but it's when the fear or pain of staying the same starts to outweigh the fear of change, like that's when you change. And so it pressure tested. It was like when we were evolving and we have all these things and like just figuring it out. And I love what one of our board of directors said to us once. We were talking about imposter syndrome and being over our skis. And he said, no one that does great things doesn't experience imposter syndrome.
This is Eric Ryan, who created Method Soap, Ollie, and Welly, saying this to us. Boston.
Very, very successful person. But I think
He's done all right. He's done all right, Adam. He's done all right.
Pictures a little bit, but it's a fantastic point, right? Which is that I find a lot of organizations, people like think, oh, like the CEO or the founders, they have all the answers, they know all these things. And the truth of the matter is like everyone's figuring it out. And if you are actually trying to do something different and good, you're blazing a new trail. You're doing something that no one has done before. And so you're figuring it out.
The terrible leader puts up a facade that they have all the answers. And I saw that very early on in kitchens. The sous chef, you bring a problem or you bring something to them and it's like just screaming like, hey, figure it out. You don't know that. No. It's the same thing that translates to my day to day now. It's like when someone brings me a problem, the healthiest and best way to solve that problem is saying, I don't know, but let's figure this out together.
Yeah.
It's Adam. It's also really important, I think. Tom and I have a vision for this company that is very, very ambitious. We aspire to be a national pizza company, both in terms of bringing legitimately great pizza to America through a pizzeria, pizza shops, and frozen pizza in grocery stores. And we are swinging for the fences with this company. The modeling we have to see other companies, not just restaurant companies, but other companies that have in fact gone from darling startup to regional to multi-regional to national. There's modeling out there. And we damn well know that the way we were organized and the way we did things, meetings, etc., and the way we have to be doing those things has to change. And we have identified our goals. They're ambitious. We know we can't be who we are today 15 years from now if we want to achieve those goals. We have to change.
Yeah, the change is inevitability if you want to build a successful business. And actually, you're making my segues really easy, David. On that note, I mean, why? Let's talk about going from one restaurant to I think six different restaurants plus a frozen brand plus a bunch of other things. Like Flower and Water opened in 2009, right? In what it was like, I don't know how many years later. when you got to the next one? Like, how did you have the discipline to stay, we're just going to stay in this one lane? And then what made you decide we're going to start growing and branch out? Because that's a big step. And I'm sure it trips up a lot of entrepreneurs in the restaurant business.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, it's so cliche to say, people don't our path to success was paved on failures and the learning lessons that came from those failures. Our second restaurant from Flour and Water was our typical second album. It was the sophomore project. And certainly for me, the ideals that I wanted to bring to the table and stick to, and it was a massive lesson, and certainly a lesson in humility and how difficult it was, how many mistakes there were along the way. And I truly believe that we wouldn't be talking to you today if those failures didn't happen and we didn't evolve. It made us a better organization. Revenue hides mistakes, and Flour and Water since day one being jam-packed to the gills, it can cover a lot of mistakes. There's revenue there to cover it up. And so it was only a couple of years before we signed new leases down the street. Where our restaurant group was really like forged in the fire was the pandemic. Like that is our shift. Like David said, we had a co-founder that the relationship became toxic. That made us a better organization and better leaders and a better partnership. And it's through those hardships where we've learned.
How did you guys survive though? Like, I think a lot of companies, when they go through those situations, they don't survive and thrive, right? Pandemic, especially for most restaurants, was a killer for a lot of them, and you guys thrived through it.
Support and partnership is how we thrived. Support and partnership, and we very early on we realized that all these restaurants and us as an organization were pivoting. It's all a defensive mode, and very early on we locked ourselves in an apartment for a weekend and said we are going on the offense. What are we doing?
This was in March of 2020. I think it was maybe 3 weeks after we had to furlough everybody, and the only people that we were able to keep because of the financial reality of the company were the partners, like, because
Wow.
I mean, it was really bad. I mean, it was before PPP money came in and the other type of government support. This was an existential risk that the company was gonna come to an end, and Tom and I spent a couple of days just back and forth, just saying, "Let's get the offense on the field when this ends." We had to have the confidence it would. And so when we talk about our ambitious plans, the real story in this company, though it seems to have begun when we opened Flour and Water in 2009, I actually don't think we began as a company until March of 2020. That's we had the benefit of partners who we knew and that we liked working together, and we had a brand and a reputation, but the company we are now was not birthed in 2009. It was birthed in 2020, and the company we will be 10 years from now absolutely was birthed in 2020.
And to signify that, we actually rebranded the company, and that was more for emotional evolution. And that's when we became Flour and Water Hospitality Group.
Yeah, that's awesome. I will say two things. On a personal note, I will say I miss the pasta full like take home thing that you can make at home during the pandemic, which my wife and I bought many of. I will say I had no idea how much butter went into the dishes until I started getting those, but they were delicious and a great thing for, sitting at home, you get a nice bottle of wine. Like, I get Flour and Water at home and this is amazing.
Oh, Adam, you're giving away all of our secrets. Whenever I cook in people's homes, they're always like, oh, okay.
You wouldn't have liked to have seen our P&Ls, what they look like when we were doing that pasta. It was nice to keep people active and keep our brand going, but that you can't build a business based on that.
No, I'm sure. I think for every restaurant, it was tough in a big way. And so then going through like the new evolution, right, in 2020, like what made you guys, and this is sort of more philosophical, this question, but like why grow it? Like what is the ego piece for you guys to decide like, hey, I want to go make this into a global brand and something big, right? You could have said, hey, look, we have great businesses in the Bay Area, everything else going well. I'm sure making a good amount of money. Why go to the next level in general?
3 years ago, or so now, 4 years ago, when we put together for the first time our like true growth pillars, documented it, signed off on the plan, we transitioned to a C corp.
Were you an LLC before that?
Yeah. And, we had the typical pass-through structure of a restaurant group. And I can speak for myself personally, the same things that drew me into the restaurant, the creativity, leadership, mentorship, the craft of that organization exists for me now on a much different playing field. And as I've grown and evolved as a person, and I always say, like, 10 years ago, if he said to me, "Do you want a line of frozen pizza?" I'd be like, "You sell out. What are you talking about? Frozen pizza?" I look at it so radically different now. The same ethos of like how wheat is grown in America, sourcing the best possible ingredients, a clean label. We're problem solving for how shitty frozen pizza is in America. And we want to put forth a product that we are truly, truly proud of in an ecosystem that we deeply believe in and centered around regenerative agriculture. The growth, you hear this in restaurants where, oh, we have great managers, and so we want to create jobs for them. Like, it's the same thing with our partnership, that we all put our hands in the middle and said, we're going to take this to a much bigger a much bigger dimension. And we all put our hands in the middle and believed in the game plan and each other. So the boats have been burned, is what I say, Adam.
Importantly, also, Adam, we'll get a little technical here. When we converted from a pass-through company to a C corp, we formalized our board of directors. That prior to that was just an advisory board. We had a comp committee. Tom and I took pay cuts. Everybody in the leadership team really took pay cuts. We weren't getting distributions anymore, which were pretty good prior to COVID. Like, we were living pretty comfortable, nice lives. And we said, you know what? We're going to all bet on our equity being worth something and build franchise value in our equity and delay the gratification that comes with the cash flow that we used to get every quarter.
What was it that still drove you to do that? Like, is there like from almost a personal level, like what was it, do you think, that both said to you was like, hey, like I'm going to delay this gratification, not for the money, maybe that a nice part, right? That sort of signifies you did this successfully, but was it to go make a mark? Like, what's the driving element? Like, when you look back in 30 years and say, this was successful, I did this because of, what do you think the reason is?
To me, again, it's kind of cliche answer, I feel like, but impact and understanding the impact that we want to have on things that we deeply believe in, whether that's the people and the evolution of the people within the company, whether that is regenerative agriculture, and leaving the planet a little bit better than we found it. All these things, it's around impact.
Well, there's also, I mean, Tom has used the word integrity no less than 100,000 times since I met him.
You know what, Dave? Not a single time on this podcast. I thought you'd be proud.
I got the opportunity to say it, but when we went to scale frozen pizza, or when we went to launch frozen pizza, we talked to every co-packer or most co-packers in America and found that they were willing to make our frozen pizza if it was made in the same way that every other frozen pizza was made. That is to say, it's made on sheeters where there's a circle that just stamps out a cracker and a bunch of crap is laid on top of it. And Tom, I'll just say it. Like, I was like, well, maybe we can make the best of it. And Tom's like, nope, integrity. And I said, okay. So Tom built a mini factory in the basement of our North Beach pizzeria and turned out what I think is the best frozen pizza ever made. And it's flying off the shelves. We can't make it enough, but we're making it ourselves. And the reason we're making it ourselves is because Tom insisted on the integrity of that product. And we just signed this 11,000-foot space, lease for 11,000-foot space in the East Bay, and we're building a big dough room that's going to make dough with 4-day fermentation. Co-packers don't want to hear about that. And hand-stretched dough for frozen pizza, so we can be in maybe 3,000 or 4,000 grocery stores with a frozen pizza. And I can tell you right now, that is not the path to venture capital-backed
Yeah.
hockey stick scale type growth. Okay, so be it. We're doing it with integrity. And if we can't do it with integrity, we're not going to do it.
And that over the 17 years is one of the foundations of the Flower and Water brand. Like, we gained our guests' trust that we are putting integrity in everything that we do. And we're very unwavering on that. We're not interested in the flash in the plan. And we said no to the flashy deal in Vegas and all these things to have a sustainable organization. And sustainability is not just where you buy your fish from. It's that it can continue. And at the core of our sustainability is around integrity and what our product is.
A few other like sort of quick things to talk about. Like, how do you manage your outside of the life type things? I mean, I know for you, Tom, I'm sure you obviously building all these things in Flower and Water, but for David, he's got other things he's building on the side as well. Family wise, you might have that like work life balance or work life unity. A lot of people talk about it as well. How do you manage those elements while trying to grow a massive business or be a restaurateur, right? I think even as a chef, right, the hours are pretty crazy for people if you're going to try to build a family, let alone build a whole business.
Like I said earlier, for the first 13 years of Flower and Water, I lived above it. And that truly allowed me to burn the candle at both ends. It was the chef's dream, right? Living above the restaurant, working a 14-hour day, and the after parties in the apartment upstairs. And, it's definitely on trend now. I didn't know at the time, my number one responsibility is to take care of myself so I can better take care of others. And that is certainly at the core of who I am today. So much like when I said I put my head down for so many years and just recently picked it up, I had one identity. And that is a very, very dangerous, mentally a very dangerous place to be, to have a single identity. I'm a chef and I'm who, and I'm going to work harder and I'm going to push farther. Also cliche, but the birth of my two daughters started to allow me to unravel that and to create these new identities that really drive me. And so, 5 years ago, I was 50 pounds heavier, and from being a father, deeply passionate and in love with endurance sports and cycling, and I feel I feel very lucky to have that evolution.
You've hired hundreds of chefs, cooks, waiters, everything else. Is there a signal in a young cook that says, hey, one day this person's going to run their own successful restaurant?
I forget who said it and where I've heard it. I did not make this up. The ones, and this is as a young chef, treat it like it's your own and one day it will be. And there's certain people that just bring that since day one. And it's so easy for me to identify that someone that has that perspective, they just treat it like it's theirs. And you can just see that one day it truly will be, and that's really specific to employees. And I think like on a partner level, there has to be a human connection. And that's deeply important to me.
So quick lightning round. One word, basically, if you can pull it off. One restaurant in SF, not your own, that every founder or every person who visits the Bay Area should eat at.
Stuart Brioza's and Nicole, his wife's restaurants, State Bird, Progress, Anchovy Bar. You're gonna have a fantastic meal.
Totally agree. Delicious. Also in the mission. So a pasta shape that you would eat each day if you could.
Bucatini.
Is there a book or something that every operator should read to help them be successful?
Inner Excellence.
I'm gonna check that one out. One last fun one. Coffee, Negroni, or something else?
Coffee. I got my caffeine intake ebbs and flows, and right now it is flowing.
Well, thank you so much. I super appreciate the time that you spent with me, with our audience, listeners. I hope you enjoyed this as well. How can folks find both of you if they want to learn more? I assume it should be fairly easy for them to figure out how if they want to make a reservation, but how can people learn more if they want to hear about your philosophies that you're putting together at Flower and Water and building out into the future?
Yeah, I think a great starting point is the Hospitality Group's website. And there's so many links. Again, Diane, our communications director, there's a ton of blogs. There's so much information there that can connect you. That's a great starting point.
Well, once again, thank you both. I sincerely appreciate it. I know our audience does too. Our time is precious. So thanks for spending some of it with me.
Adam, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much for having us.